Okay, let's begin, shall we? So hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We're going to be talking about your email and your cloud data and how to make sure they're safe. And the title of our webinar is Think Your Email is Safe? Think Again, the protections you need to have. I hope you'll find this presentation interesting and informative. And I also want to mention that we'll have time for lots of questions at the end. But if something occurs to you before then and you want an immediate answer, please type your question into the Q&A box and one of my associates will let me know. I'll do my best to answer it as quickly as I can. So let's get started. As I mentioned, we're here today to talk about your email and your cloud data. And our aim is to talk specifically about what has militated the kind of changes that we're seeing in terms of cyber attacks, what that means for your email and your other cloud data, how hackers can gain access to your critical information, and the potential impact on your data. In the process, and once you have a better understanding of those risk factors, we're going to focus on the things we are seeing out there, potential impact of an email breach, how to best protect your organization, and finally, of course, we'll have time for all of your questions. And if you've been on any of our previous webinars, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of secrets. So here's a quick word about the end of our webinar. If you hang on to the end, we'll tell you about a bundle that we've put together. And if you have a contract with Rogers or Bell, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of bundles. So basically, we want to help everybody attending today secure your email and your other cloud data, and we put together a bundle to help with that. More on that later. Many of you have probably heard this before, but for the people who don't know me, I'd like to make a brief introduction. I first became fascinated with computers when I was in high school at the age of 14. Now, today, that would make me a late bloomer, but in 1969, I was definitely an outlier. Ultimately, I decided I was going to turn that passion into a profession, and I trained as a software engineer at U of T in New York. And while I was still in my final year at York, I started my first business. By the time I was 30, my partners and I were running a software company with 25 employees. And by the time I was 40, we had grown to 80 employees with offices in Toronto, Montreal, New York, and Los Angeles. I sold that business back in 1995. That seems like an age ago. And founded Connectability to concentrate on IT infrastructure because at the time I foresaw that desktop computers and network computing were going to be the foundation of future IT, and I wanted to be there to help other businesses achieve their long-term technology objectives. Now, in recent years, we've seen an enormous increase in the quantity and the sophistication of cyber attacks, to say nothing of the increased concomitant costs, and that's why we're holding this webinar. So let's start at the beginning and ask why we're meeting. And we spend a lot of time thinking about cybersecurity. And I mentioned a few moments ago that we've observed some changes in what we might call the hackerverse. I'm going to speak to those changes momentarily, but I think it's probably worthwhile to focus on why we're seeing these changes. And the answer is, perhaps unsurprisingly, this: COVID-19. So what's the connection between a respiratory virus pandemic and a whole new pattern of cyber attacks? Well, the short answer is that COVID has changed a lot of behaviors. For one thing, it sent all of us scurrying to the safety of our homes, where it's rare to find things like business-grade firewalls or server infrastructure. And as a result, a lot of businesses used COVID as a motivation for accelerating the move of their data into the cloud. And that was in order to facilitate work from home. Unfortunately, in many cases, that also resulted in weakened security protections and less frequent reminders of security concerns to keep us all on our toes. Which brings us back to the question of how all this has changed the practice of hackers. Now, with key data now located in the cloud, most organizations no longer have any need to leave any of their on-premises infrastructure, things like servers, exposed to the internet. And as a result, many corporate networks are now completely locked down to the outside world, which leaves no gateways for hackers to exploit. And in any case, even if a hacker did get into the network, a lot of the critical data that used to be there, the critical data that they would want to steal or ransom, it's no longer there. It's in the cloud. So where would this lead your average hacker? Well, I think the answer is pretty obvious. They've pivoted to attacking cloud infrastructure like Office 365 and Google Workspace. And that almost always starts with email. So what is the impact of this shift in tactics? Let's look at some of those impacts. And the first of them is impersonation, or sometimes called identity theft. If a hacker gets into your email, what can they do? Well, they could start by sending emails to your entire contact list, maybe making a fraudulent offer, or perhaps asking for confidential information, or maybe just sending them an infected attachment. They might also try to fool someone on your team into transferring money on your behalf. The well-known management consultant, Vern Harnish, lost $400,000 from exactly this technique. Or maybe they want to scan your email looking for confidential information like credit card numbers, social insurance numbers, passwords, or even just personal identifying information like names, addresses, and phone numbers. And they could be looking for enough personal information about your contacts to use that information for social engineering and spear phishing. In the end, all of this could result in significant damage to your reputation and the reputation of your organization. The second impact I want to mention is data theft. So what exactly can a hacker accomplish by stealing your cloud data? And the answer is actually quite a lot. For example, they could ransom your data, not by encrypting it, although that's an option we'll discuss in a moment. No, instead, they'll simply demand money to prevent them from dumping all of your confidential information onto the public internet. And if you're in a regulated industry, like finance, real estate, or healthcare, that could lead to heavy fines, to say nothing of potential lawsuits, even the loss of your certification or your insurance coverage. But even if you're not yet in a regular industry, governments at all levels are looking at implementing increasingly stringent privacy legislation that could have a serious impact on you if your privacy is compromised. Finally, even if you escape penalties and lawsuits, are your customers ever going to trust you after your security has been breached?
So Ted, just jumping in here, we have a question from David Nuttall. Would anti-malware software catch an infected email attachment?
The short answer is maybe. It depends on the software. It depends on the attachment. And it also depends on the nature of that. You know, a phishing attack is typically a link that they want you to click on. And a lot of software does not actually do any drill down into the links. But we're going to talk about some of that in a moment. And this is the last impact I want to mention, and that's ransomware. The fact is, cloud data is just as vulnerable to attack as the data on your computer. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. But let's say your cloud data was compromised, and then you went ahead and paid the ransom. What guarantee do you have that the attacker didn't keep a copy of your data that he or she is then going to dump onto the internet or sell to the highest bidder? So let's turn to the example I just mentioned. The fellow on this screen is Kevin Mitnick, who's sometimes referred to as the world's most famous hacker. At one point, he was #1 on the FBI's most wanted hacker list. Today, he works as a white hat hacker, helping companies stay safe. And what you're going to see now is a demonstration of something called Ransom Cloud. And I should mention that I've seen this demonstration live and in person, and it's terrifying. So here goes.
Formerly a black hat hacker and the most wanted hacker in the world. Today I'm a white hat hacker, so I help organizations like yours stay secure and help your employees have better security hygiene. So what's the #1 threat to your organization today? It's ransomware. What exactly is ransomware? It's malicious software that once it gets into your environment, it scrambles or encrypts all your files so you no longer have access to it. So how do the bad guys get ransomware into your network? The #1 way is through spear phishing. That's where the bad guy sends malicious emails to your employees, and if they click on a link, open up an attachment, it infects their computer with ransomware and scrambles all their files and even the files that are on network shares. So the threat of ransomware is actually evolving into what I call ransom cloud. And this is how the bad guy deploys ransomware into your cloud services like Office 365. So over here on the right, I have a Windows 10 laptop that's all up to date with the security patches. It's running the latest antivirus definitions. This is the typical laptop that might be in your environment. And we're also logged into Office 365, as you could see. And you could see that my emails are pretty much normal, what you might see. I'll go through a couple of them and we could actually read those emails. Over here, I have the hacker console. You see it's logged into an application called Sapo. This is the attacker in the cloud. And the attacker is going to be able to send a spear phishing attack to the victim, which is over here. And once the victim falls for the spear phishing attack, you'll see what the attacker could do with their cloud-based email. So what are we going to do for the pretext, the con, the phish? Is we're going to pretend to be a division of Microsoft that's deploying a new product called Anti-Spam Pro. Anti-Spam Pro will be a product that helps eliminate spam on their Office 365 account. So let me show you how it works. So we're going to pretend to be support at antispampro.com. We're going to be Anti-Spam Pro as the company name. The victim is going to be me. I'm going to type in my name as well. Right now that's been set. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see this. And then I'm going to click create. And what create does, it will send the spear phishing attack. Pay attention to the upper right-hand portion of the screen. I'm going to click create. You'll see up here that it should say sent in a moment. There it goes. It says the email has successfully been sent. That's the attacker sending the spear phishing email to my account over here. And as you can see, I just received an email from Anti-Spam Pro. Let's take a look and see what it says. So I'm going to be the victim here. I'm going to double click the email. It's going to have the Microsoft branding in it, as you can see. And basically it's a message that says, as a part of our effort to improve the experience of all our customers and to eliminate spam-based email, we're offering you to enable the service. And if you want the product, the only thing you have to do to enable it is click the following link in the email. Just click the link. So let's go ahead and do it. It's going to ask me to, re-authenticate, which is normal. And then what it asks me to do, it asks for permissions because Anti-Spam Pro needs permissions to eliminate spam. And what an ordinary user will take a look at it and says, yeah, this sounds normal that they need to look at your email, they need to read your email, they need full access and this sort of thing. And as soon as the victim accepts those permissions, it's game over. And now we go to the attacker computer and we're going to refresh. and we're going to enable certain functionalities. So this web application is actually in the cloud. This victim could be any company located on any part of the planet. It doesn't matter. So what functions do we have here? If we look at the bottom here, what we could do is we could view the victim's contacts of this person here. I could view their emails. I could send email as them, and a few other things which I'll get to in a moment. So let's go ahead and view the emails. Let me zoom out. We'll view emails. What does view emails mean? What I'm doing is I'm viewing the emails of the victim that clicked on the spear phishing link, so I have complete access to their emails. What else I could do is I could actually send email as them. So I could send email to their colleagues, to their business partners, to their family or friends, and use the same spear phishing attack to attack them. But what's the most scariest of them all is Ransom Cloud. What Ransom Cloud's going to do is, in real time, as you'll see, infect the victim's emails, actually encrypt them so the user no longer has access. So let's go ahead and enable Ransom Cloud. I'm going to click Enable Ransom Cloud. And you see in real time, it says infected, 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 infected. What the attacker is doing is actually encrypting all the emails in this account so the victim no longer has access. What we do see is the subject line. Why do the attackers leave the subject line? Is so the victim knows what emails they can't access. So if we take a look over here, we'll scroll up, and you see an email that says, your emails have been encrypted. If you ever get that type of message, you're going to have a very bad day. So let's take a look at the message. I'm going to double click the email, and I get this scary message. This is what exactly a ransomware attack looks like. We have a message that says your emails have been encrypted. It explains that your attachments have been encrypted as well, and you will no longer have access to it unless you send $300 of Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency, to this Bitcoin address, which belongs to the criminal, the bad guy. So unless you pay the ransom, you'll no longer have access to your email. A pretty scary thing. So what can you actually do about this type of attack? I strongly recommend that you consider a managed service provider. These are the individuals that are trained to help you remediate and recover from this attack without reinfecting your environment. What traits of a managed service provider should you look for? Well, one, that could make it a priority to educate your employees not to fall for phishing attacks. Phishing attacks are the #1 way an attacker is going to deploy Ransom Cloud into your environment. Also to deploy defensive technologies like EDRs, which are endpoint detection and response tools to detect malware such as ransomware. So these tools that are like antivirus software could hopefully stop the ransomware in its tracks, even though the victim clicked on it. Your MSP should have really good support. So if you ever have a problem, they'll come by your side and help you recover. And most importantly, you want a managed service provider that could help you back up your information locally or in the cloud. And of course, you should consider using a SaaS protection service to, again, protect your organization from this type of threat. So there you go. Stay safe out there. And remember, you have to protect yourself against these types of attacks because they can have a substantial effect on your business.
As I mentioned, I've seen that demonstration live. It terrifies me every time. But the good news, I have to say, is that so far, and very fortunately, none of our clients have experienced this attack, and we're aiming to keep it that way. So here's a really important question. How do hackers get into your mailbox in the first place? Well, Kevin showed us one method, but I want to say that the single most common attack vector is much simpler, and it's this: compromised passwords. Once a hacker has your password, they have the keys to your kingdom unless you implement some of the protections that we're going to talk about momentarily. So it's worthwhile to ask, how did they get your password in the first place? And truthfully, it's often very simple. Many people use the same password for everything. So if someone intercepts your Amazon password, they've probably got your email password and your banking password. Now, if you're not one of those people, then I'm offering you my congratulations, but you'd be surprised how many people do this. Another vulnerability is easy to guess passwords like the name of your cat or one of your kids or your birthday. And if you're active on social media like Facebook or Instagram, these are things that are often easy for a hacker to find out. Now, cleverer hackers might try phishing or social engineering to get you to inadvertently reveal your password. And there's always brute force hacking, and you'd be surprised how effective that is. They basically have bots that will try all kinds of password permutations. And finally, there are regular dumps of stolen passwords onto the dark web, and many companies have not yet implemented two-factor or multi-factor authentication, which would prevent most of these breaches. So now we've talked about the how. What about the why? Why are hackers doing this in the first place? And the simple answer is money. Anytime a hacker gets into your email, he or she has many different avenues for generating income, ranging from various kinds of ransom to using your email account as a launch pad for attacks on others. We should also ask who's behind these attacks and what they have to gain. And I apologize if you've seen this slide before, but I think it's important to understand that hacking is big business. Among the most effective and best funded hacker groups are state-sponsored cyber warfare groups based in countries like North Korea and Iran, but also Russia and China. Now, what do they hope to gain? In some cases, they're looking to create instability in their Western opponents. But in probably the majority of cases, it's just about money. Remember that states like Russia, North Korea, and Iran are the subject of large-scale sanctions, and therefore access to Western currency is extremely limited. By upping their hacking activity, it gives them a back channel for generating cash that can then be used to fund terrorism, weapons development, and other unsavory activities. Another source of hacking is organized crime syndicates around the world. They've discovered that hacking is a relatively low-risk way of generating high profits without putting any of their members directly in harm's way. If it's lucrative and low risk, they're going to keep doing it until it stops working. Terrorist groups are also using hacking to raise money for their various causes. The fact is that the day of the pimply-faced kid in his basement are largely a thing of the past. Hacking today is big business. Now, I think we should also talk about the risks of an intrusion, although I'm sure you're aware of at least some of these. And if someone gets into your cloud data, do you know what they might have taken? Is it possible that they deleted some information that you don't know about or changed something in a file that has critical information? Well, any of those things are possible. And a serious virus or ransomware attack could put your business on hold for a week or longer. Could you afford to go for a week or two without taking orders or shipping products? Or if you're in the finance industry, could you conduct trades without access to your records? New opportunities. Would you be able to meet with and promote your services or your products effectively without your data? There's also damage to your reputation. If it ever gets out that you were breached, especially if it was a serious breach, would your customers ever trust you again? And wouldn't this give your competitors a wedge that they can use against you? I also mentioned that governments are starting to mandate fines, sometimes stiff fines, for companies that allow their confidential data to be breached. Could you afford to pay those fines if it happened to you? And what about litigation? If hackers leak critical information belonging to your customers, how exposed would you be to potential lawsuits? And finally, if you're in an industry like finance or healthcare or real estate, where there are specific licensing requirements, you could lose your license as a result of a breach. Now, all of these are serious, and you need to do everything in your power to make sure none of this ever happens to you. I'd like to start with some free things that you can do to increase your security. I mean, free is always a good thing. And the first place to start is passwords. Passwords are the keys to your kingdom. A compromised password could let a hacker into your network, causing potentially irreparable damage. So here are some things to remember. Number one, don't use the same password for everything. Number two, use passphrases instead of passwords. So a passphrase might be, I live at 123 Main Street. Those are much harder to guess and much, much harder to hack. Change your passwords regularly. And now, if you're using passphrases, you probably don't have to do this as often because they're much harder, as I mentioned, to guess. And if you are using different passwords, congratulations, but you probably want to investigate a password manager like LastPass to keep track of all of those passwords. Next, never share or expose your password. Don't put it on a Post-it note. Don't stick it to your monitor. Don't put it inside your drawer. Those are all places that people will look. And finally, never enter a password on public Wi-Fi network. So if you're sitting in Starbucks and you're on Starbucks Wi-Fi, don't log into your bank. It's different if you're using your mobile data, but if you're on a public Wi-Fi network, never type a password. Somebody could be sniffing. Here's another incredibly important freebie, multi-factor or two-factor authentication, sometimes called MFA or 2FA. And very simply, it works by requiring a second token, typically a 6-digit number that changes every time. And you need that in order to access a website or your email, even if you know the password. You also need to have an authorized device, typically your mobile phone, to get that second token. So even if a hacker gets your password, there's no way they can access your account without the second token. The good news is that many, in fact, most websites and email servers offer this capability for free. So that includes banks, investment companies, Microsoft, Google, and so forth. Now, at Connectability, we use two-factor authentication to access all of our cloud-based tools and information, and that includes our monitoring tools, our ticketing system, our password database, and many others. And while at first it may seem like a lot of extra work, you get used to it very quickly. And in fact, the ransom cloud hack that you saw Kevin Mitnick demonstrate becomes more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult if you have 2FA enabled. Well, those are the important free tools. But the good news is that even the tools that have associated costs are still pretty inexpensive. And frankly, if you compare the cost of those tools to the cost you would incur if you experienced a serious data breach, or even a minor one for that matter, you'll see that there's no comparison. An ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure. Before I talk about those tools, here are a couple of thoughts about cybersecurity that you'll want to keep in mind. First and foremost, ensuring that you and all of your team members are educated about cybersecurity risks is key. There's an expression that the biggest risk to your organization walks on two legs, and we obviously don't mean kangaroos. So it's important that your team members are always alert and aware of the dangers. In a few moments, we'll talk about cybersecurity awareness training that will help you stay safe at a nominal cost. Second, it's essential that you have effective, complete, and thoroughly tested backup for all of your data. In the worst case, for example, a successful ransomware attack, the only thing that will allow you to recover quickly is effective backup. And finally, there's no such thing as having too much protection. Cyber criminals are always looking for vulnerabilities that they can exploit. And here's something to think about. You need to have perfect defenses because hackers only need to find a single vulnerability. So let's go back to talking about some of the tools that we think a well-protected organization must have. And I'll start with the most familiar tool, and that's antivirus software. Now, once upon a time, that was all the protection anyone needed. But today, there are so many risks that antivirus can only provide limited protection, which doesn't mean you don't need it. And it doesn't matter whether you're using a PC, a Mac, or even a Linux computer. There are viruses and other malware that target all of them. Just as important, do your research. All antivirus solutions are not created equal. If malware does get onto your computer, a really effective antivirus solution can prevent it from doing serious damage. Now, for mid-level antivirus protection, we like WebRoot, that's our favorite, but we're also fans of Bitdefender and ESET. And if you're looking for a higher-end, enterprise-grade solution, you could choose one of the tools used by Fortune 100 companies. That would include products like SentinelOne or CrowdStrike. They're more expensive than mid-range products, but they're also a lot better at detecting and stopping new or zero-day infections. Another tool you need to employ at the desktop level is effective and regular patching. Microsoft, Apple, and the Linux world release regular security patches to correct known vulnerabilities. And as soon as those vulnerabilities are identified, hackers go to work to attack them. So ensuring that you apply patches promptly is an important piece of the security puzzle. If you're a connectability customer, we take care of this for you. If you're not, you want to make sure that you are updating your system on a regular basis. And finally, education and awareness are critical. We sometimes talk about the unit between the desk and the chair. So that's you and your users. And the better informed you are, the less likely you are to fall for a phishing or a social engineering attack. As I just mentioned, antivirus is unfortunately not enough to ensure your safety. Hackers are a clever bunch, and they can often find ways around conventional antivirus programs. So in order to combat that kind of activity, a new generation of security tools is emerging, and those tools include things like intrusion detection and removal. This is intended to identify and block the kind of attack that you just saw Kevin Mitnick demonstrate. There's also zero trust solutions, and these operate by permitting only very specific programs and operations to be performed on your computer. Anything that breaks the rules is automatically blocked and then reported to the system administrator. And finally, there's MDR, which is managed detection and response, where your system is constantly monitored for security events and responded to in real time by a 24/7 security center. And we're just about to launch that service. Mentioned education a moment ago. And the truth is that the biggest risk to your organization is your people. Not because they have bad intentions or because they mean to cause damage, but because they lack the knowledge to effectively avoid threats. It's easy to fix. We offer several cybersecurity awareness training tools to our clients. But even if you're not a client yet, there are still plenty of other training solutions out there. It's easy and inexpensive to prepare your team to protect themselves from cyber threats. And on the subject of knowledge, we also suggest that you look into a dark web monitoring solution. This will alert you if any of your organization's credentials are compromised on the dark web. So now let's assume I'm a hacker outside your perimeter wall and I'm trying to get to you, to your data. Now let's say Your computers are all thoroughly protected with antivirus software and other tools. So how is that hacker going to attack you? Well, the answer is pretty simple. And in fact, you just saw it demonstrated a few minutes ago. The answer is email. And phishing is the single most common form of attack. Phishing is how the most successful hacks have been achieved. And that would include companies that you would think would be more sophisticated, companies like JP Morgan Bank, Home Depot, Target, TJX, and many others. So why is phishing so effective for hackers? There are a few answers. One is that it's important to understand that most hackers are smart. They're criminals, but they're smart criminals. So they do their best to copy legitimate emails from legitimate sources, like Microsoft or a bank. And unless you know what to look for, phishing emails can look very realistic. Second, we have a saying that, frankly, some people will click on anything. And that doesn't mean it's malicious. It just means that they haven't been educated. They don't know better. And finally, as good as they may be, most firewalls and antivirus solutions offer only very limited protection against spam. So a lot of it will not be caught by those tools. What will catch spam is email filtering. Both Microsoft and Google have email filtering built into their email platforms. So you're not going to receive many ads for Viagra or Canadian pharmacies. But those filters have a much harder time with more subtle phishing attacks, especially when they are very carefully crafted like a spear phishing attack. And that's why we use and always recommend advanced email filtering solutions like Proofpoint Essentials, which is one of the world's leaders in spam filtration. A good filtering solution will ensure that only a tiny fraction of junk mail that hits your email or mailbox rather on a daily basis actually gets through. Now, I want to be very clear. No filtering solution is perfect. There's always going to be a small amount of spam that evades those filters. And it's frankly a cat and mouse game between the spammers and the filtering companies. But having a solution like Proofpoint in place will make it much less likely that you'll be fooled by a phishing attack. And in a few moments, I'm going to talk about how you can leverage that level of protection for your business. But I also want to stress that email filtering plus at SaaS or cloud-to-cloud backup, which we're going to talk about momentarily, are the two single most important protections that every organization needs to have. So now we're talking about SaaS or cloud-to-cloud backup, and if I had to point to a single protection, this is the most important tool that every company needs to have. While Microsoft and Google do back up your cloud data, they're very limited backups. For one thing, they don't go back more than 14 days, maybe 30 days at the outside. And for another, they're not granular backups. You cannot restore an individual email or an individual file or folder. You can only restore your entire mailbox or your OneDrive. What if you needed to recover a single file or a single email that was accidentally or intentionally deleted? Well, you don't want to have to restore your entire mailbox or OneDrive because in the process, you could lose the emails or the documents that arrived after that message that was deleted. And those are the reasons why we stress the importance of backing up your cloud data. It gives you the ability to restore missing data from any point in time at a granular level. And it's not expensive. For an environment with 20 users, it's typically less than $100 per month. Now think about that. Is the safety of your data worth spending $1,200 a year? That's probably a lot less than you're paying for business insurance. So as we wrap up, I'd like to circle back and summarize a few key points from our discussion today. Specifically, number one, it's no secret that cyber attacks are becoming more frequent, more sophisticated, and more expensive every day. Number two, hackers are finding new ways of getting at your data, and your cloud data is their next target. And finally, every organization should be asking itself what it needs to do to ensure that it's not the next victim of a cyber attack. So we want to help. And with that in mind, as I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, we have a special offer for you. And here goes. We really strongly recommend, as the most critical protections, having effective email filtering and cloud-to-cloud backup. So if you subscribe to both services, that would be Proofpoint and Dropsuite, we're offering a bundled price of $897 per mailbox, which is a discount of over 10% on the regular price. Now, if you already have one of these products, you can add the second one at the bundled price. So what will an investment in these tools do for you? Number one, it will ensure the safety of your data, protect your organization's reputation, and ultimately it will deliver peace of mind. If you're ready to take advantage of this great offer, please email us. Our address is on the slide, or give us a call, or just post your request in the Q&A, and we'll get the ball rolling. And please remember that the deadline for these promotional offers is 2 Fridays from now on lucky Friday, the 13th of May. So that's all I have to say for this webinar. I want to thank you all for your time today. And now I'd be very happy to answer any questions. Please just type them into the Q&A and I'll do my very best to answer them. Here's a couple of questions. What does the backup for Office 365 and G Suite include? Does it back up email only? Good question. The answer is that it actually backs up the entire environment. So with Office 365, it backs up not just your email, but everything associated with Outlook. So your calendar, tasks, notes, etc. Plus it backs up OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. In the case of G Suite or a Google Workplace, it backs up your email, of course, contacts, plus your Google Drive. Another question, will slides be made available for download? Yes, we will be posting the video on our website, and we can provide you with a PDF of the presentation within the next week or two. Can I get ransomware by opening an email? If by that you mean just clicking on the email to sort of bring it into full screen, the answer is no. Generally, you have to click on something inside the email for it to generate ransomware. It actually has to run a program. Do you recommend any particular password managers? Well, for our customers, we offer access to our password portal, which is called MyGlue, for free. Probably the most widely used one is LastPass, but there are many, many password managers out there. And many of them, frankly, are free, especially if it's for personal use.
And there's another tool called Passportal that's also highly recommended in the marketplace. So there are a number of market leaders, but as Ted said, there are also a number of free options.
So if my email was breached and my computer was infected with ransomware, how long would it take to recover my data? Well, that's a complex question because they're actually two separate issues. So if your computer is infected with ransomware, this is what I would say. These days, most people do not store files on their local computer. Most people store their files in the cloud. If your files are stored in the cloud and backed up, basically you just have to reset your computer back to factory, reload your software, and then re-access your files. If you have files stored locally on your computer and it's infected with ransomware, then you need to have, and you want to be protected, you need to have some kind of a local backup solution in place. That can be done with OneDrive or Google Drive if you have either of those services, Office 365 or Google Workplace. And then there are more sophisticated solutions like Google Cloud Continuity, Datto Cloud Continuity, which will actually do a full image backup of your computer, which would allow you to restore it back to exactly where it was before. Now, if your cloud data is infected, then really potentially you can go back to Microsoft or Google and ask them to restore the entirety of it. But frankly, it can be a process to get them to do that and can take time. Whereas if you have a backup service like Dropsuite, generally it's a few clicks of the mouse and it will be restoring your data very quickly. Okay, I've heard of drive-by infections where a computer gets infected with malware just by visiting a contaminated website. Is this a real thing these days? Well, generally, in order to be contaminated, a website has to run something. Typically, the settings on most web browsers would block a website automatically running a script or a program. But if you've played with the security settings on your browser, it could potentially get through. It's not a likely occurrence, but it could happen. If you're seriously concerned about something like that, the best solution is what I mentioned earlier, a zero trust solution, because it basically prevents anything from running on your computer that hasn't been pre-authorized. Next question, how long does it take to implement email filtering or backup for Office 365? Well, the great thing is that all of these things happen in the background and in the cloud. So typically, nobody needs to visit your office. Nobody needs to touch your computer. It's done totally behind the scenes. Cloud backup is extremely simple because essentially it just connects a service to your mailbox, which then goes off and does the backups. Nobody even notices that it's happening. Email filtering is a little more intrusive because the way that works is that the email first passes through the filtering agent before it gets to Office 365 or Google. So there is a period at which we have to change your mail exchanger MX records. Generally, that takes roughly 2 hours. So we tend to do that on an evening or a weekend. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to have to thank you for the information, which I appreciate. You're very welcome. We're going to wrap up. As I mentioned, we will be posting the video to our YouTube channel, and it should be accessible from our website. We will also make the presentation available as a PDF in the next week or two. If you are interested in the tools we discussed, and I strongly encourage you to be interested, please reach out to us and we can have a further discussion with you. So I wish you a great rest of your day, and stay tuned for our next webinar. Thank you again, everybody.